Good afternoon. We welcome today Melissa Lee, Minister for Economic Development, Ethnic Communities, ACC, and more than all that, a very dear friend. Melissa is a very seasoned and senior politician and an accomplished media person. Melissa, welcome to Indian Newslink videocast and podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And I apologize for my voice because I've got a cold and my voice has changed.
Oh, well, we'll make the best of what you can. Melissa, can you outline what exactly the Ministry of Economic Development does? Because we do get queries from our readers and viewers as to what exactly that does it means, because it has different connotations in different countries.
Well, there isn't a Ministry of Economic Development. That's a clarification in one. I'm the Minister for Economic Development, and because of that portfolio responsibility, I have ownership of MB, Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment.
Yep.
And so I am the overarching owner of MB. And MB, in its work, is responsible for more than 15 portfolios, including immigration, including small business, including housing. All of those portfolios come into MB and they are supported by MB, and I have ownership of that ministry. Specifically for my economic development portfolio, I have my own set of criteria and work plan.
Right.
The things that I have responsibility for New Zealand Growth Capital Partners. I have New Zealand Screen Production Rebate, the international portion of it, which is a big portion. The other one is a New Zealand government's procurement systems. I have responsibility for that. And major events fund that I am actually responsible for. And also, together with Minister for Trade, I have responsibility of NZTE. So those are the responsibilities.
So it's quite widespread. So when you say that you have ownership for ministries such as immigration, housing, and so on, do policy issues also come under your jurisdiction?
Specific policies are actually the responsibilities of the ministers specifically, but I have the overarching management of MB.
So, for instance, what touches most people is immigration. So, when there are changes announced or when there are tweaks made to existing rules and regulations, are you, as an MBIE owner, consulted?
Specific policy is actually the responsibility of the specific minister responsible
Right.
for the portfolio.
Okay.
But in terms of the operations side, MB is responsible and I have visibility on that.
Coming to one major aspect of what MBIE does is about increasing capital availability and capital intensity for New Zealand businesses. I like to dovetail it with what sometimes the Reserve Bank of New Zealand does as far as the banks are concerned. They say that there has to be capital adequacy, which are set in terms of Basel standards, as you know. What exactly does the MBIE expect or support businesses in terms of capital availability, increasing it?
It's not just MBIE, but it's actually government as a whole,
Okay.
including NZTE. When we actually look at New Zealand's economy, one of the things that is actually very clear is that compare ourselves to other small advanced economies, we are actually doing not as well as them in terms of
Would you say
capital.
that is comparing with Singapore,
Yeah.
Ireland?
Yep. In terms of those issues like capital intensity that businesses actually need to invest in their businesses, like they haven't got enough capital to invest in new machineries to grow productivity. So we actually need to actually get the economy in a situation where there is availability of capital to invest into businesses so they can actually grow as a business. And that is some of the focus of the whole of government, to try and increase those. Capital intensity, capital availability is something that I work on. And also together with New Zealand Growth Capital Partners, which runs two funds. One is Aspire Fund and the other one is Elevate Fund. Aspire is a fund that actually invests in startups. Elevate is a fund of funds that actually co-invest with private capital.
Right.
And the other aspect of trying to increase capital is I'm actually government as a whole is very, very focused on trying to bring more capital from overseas. Because, I remember John Key a long time ago saying, we will never become rich as a nation if we just sell among ourselves. If we do business among ourselves, we need to sell to the world.
True.
The distance from the world, New Zealand being so far away, makes it quite difficult for our businesses to actually be competitive. And these are some of the reasons why we have ministers of foreign affairs, Minister for Trade, myself, Minister for Economic Development, and even everyone actually so focused on trying to drive relationships from overseas with our trading partners, our diplomatic partners, to actually grow New Zealand's economy and increase our capital.
See, I've got a question on this. When you say companies must invest about and increase their capital, one of the challenges that businesses face in New Zealand is that a very large percentage of businesses are small, 90% are owner-operated or family-owned. For them, they have the problem of raising capital. Most of them work on their mortgages. Raising capital or getting loans from banks is a huge challenge. Considering that, and then the rest of the 10% of businesses are large enough, they are able to raise. So how does a government like yours, which is committed to promoting businesses, and you say that overseas capital, etc., which is a good thing, but for the existing businesses, to make sure that they don't fail under the current economic conditions, how are your ministry or your government geared to help them?
That's a very difficult question and a tough one because, individual ministers are not responsible for specific businesses and their success or their failure. What we can actually do is actually make sure that the settings are correct so that the business, doing business is actually easy for people. Access of market from overseas investors or even local investors wanting to invest in business should be easier. And I think, these are some of the things that we're actually working on rather than trying to specifically look at one business and say, hey, we're going to actually make it easier for you to actually find, bank loans or actually, cover how you actually can cover your debt. I think, New Zealanders, there is no problems in terms of the way that people actually start up in New Zealand. Doing businesses, apparently, compared to other countries, is actually easy. But I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that we have a scaling up problem. That they come to a certain point in their business where they are quite happy just being themselves and not actually thinking about marketing to the world or exporting or doing other things and actually growing their business. Actually, have scaling their businesses up to something that could be a lot bigger than what it is. And I think that's about aspiration as well. And when I talked about not having that capital available for them to actually scale up is the issue. And I don't think it's just about getting a loan and mortgaging the house to actually scale up their business. What they need to do is actually think about, the business, how it can actually entice investors to their good ideas and business opportunities to actually invest in their business so they can actually, not only products. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I visited a biotech company, and they literally, their whole export, they export 100% of their product. Their whole export is 29 grams, between 29 and 30 something grams. And they actually produce protein extract. It's an antigen that actually is used on diagnostic purposes for autoimmune diseases like lupus. And they export everything to the world. And they bring in tens of millions of dollars just for that 29 grams. And they were originally a New Zealand company, which actually got international investment to actually grow. And I asked them, I said, can you actually meet the target that we currently have? The government has a target of doubling our export value in 10 years. And they said, we will definitely hit that target. We are very, very aspirational. It's nice to actually have a government that has a target. This is what we're trying to do, encourage them to actually expand.
So you've got some successful enterprises which have done well because they know what they're supposed to do. But how do you spread this message? This is what John Key did when he came in 2008, when the country was going into recession, somewhat similar to what it is now. But how would you encourage companies? Because, first of all, businesses must have proper plans, strategies, and so on, which I think many of them lack in this country. So, how can you support as a government to encourage them to go into this kind of export activity?
Yeah, I mean, I just recently came back from Invercargill, traveling as a Minister for Economic Development, meeting with the Chambers of Commerce, business support services, the Mayoral Forum, and actually talking about how they are actually looking at potentially diversifying their economy. Because, I mean, for Invercargill, TY, smelter has been the biggest, influence in their economy. And, for a long time, they were actually worried about potential closure of TY, but now there isn't that potential closure. They have actually secured the power agreement, power supply agreement for the next 20 years. So the economy in Invercargill is actually potentially set for 20 years. But they realize that they need to diversify as an economy. And so the Chambers of Commerce are actually together with MB and Economic Development Funding to support the businesses and the workers to try and diversify their skill sets, to actually upskill them into different potential opportunities, and actually seeing how their business have actually been operating specifically to actually supply to TY, for example, but instead looking at their business and say, hey, there must be other ways that we can actually market to other parts, not just TY. And so these are the kinds of work that MB and
I think it's worth exploring further, Minister. As you know, we are constantly engaged with businesses in New Zealand, and our Business Awards program is not just a competition. We try to encourage businesses to do better, invest, etc. Maybe I can engage with your ministry and see how we can carry forth your plans and ideas further. I'll be
But
in
it's
touch.
not just me. It's, small business is the
Yeah,
responsibility
we'll talk
for
to Andrew Bailey.
Minister
Yeah, yeah.
of Small Business, which is Andrew Bailey.
Yeah, we continue.
Yeah.
We'll do that. Now, talking of exports, your government is committed to doubling the exports over the next 10 years. And I believe Minister Todd Mackley has been doing an exceptional job. And New Zealand is again looking up in the export sector. And he will be the guest speaker at our annual lecture next month, which is on trade. Unfortunately, you're not available on that day. He would be speaking he will be giving a lecture on global markets, and then whether there's a need for trade agreements. How can countries like New Zealand leverage their size and ability to serve markets? So how would you go about increasing the exports of New Zealand, and which are the new areas where you're looking at?
Doubling the export, doubling the value of export in 10 years is the goal of the government. And together with Minister Todd Mackley and we are actually working on that. And, not only are we actually focusing on making sure that we have more trade deals, and, our Minister Todd Mackley is actually trying very, very hard to actually sort of, go out to markets. At the moment,
He's in Italy.
He's traveling lots, and so is the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and so is our Prime Minister, and many other ministers traveling overseas to actually secure deals and actually engagements. But I don't think it's just about trade deals. I think it's actually about engaging with our trading partners and our diplomatic partners to actually create a better relationship in terms of the engagement. And we are very focused on the free trade deal that we actually wanted to progress with India. We are very focused on making sure that we actually have it's an aspirational goal, having doubling our export value in 10 years. And it's not just about growing more apples or beef and lamb and dairy. It's actually about thinking differently in terms of the value that we actually create in our exports. The other day I was talking to one of the award winners of a trade awards, and I didn't want to name the particular award, but this company makes scales that actually you put your luggage on at the airport, and they won an international award. And I said to them, I said, you can make scales for the world and you're actually exporting that and people actually see your brand, but how do you actually sort of scale up, the export value? And one of the things that he was actually talking about is that the scales themselves are no longer just scales that actually tell you how heavy things are, but they are data that actually captured because the technology has actually progressed so far that now that data is probably almost or even more valuable than the actual scale. So this is the added value of the scale business that he's actually running.
Maybe they have X-rays or something.
No, it's a data.
Okay.
It could be, I don't know, X-rays, but you could maybe talk to them about your idea.
Yeah.
But it's about value add as well. It's not just about products that we produce. It's how do we actually add value. And I think many ministers are actually looking at different things, including aquaculture. How do we actually progress different parts of New Zealand's economy to actually add value?
I think that's a discussion we should have separately, because I have Todd McClay has come here. We've talked about exports, and I think a joint discussion between you and him in terms of increasing the value of exports along, he might be doing volume and you would be doing value. A combination of these would be what is the aspirational goal that you're talking about. So we shall do that. Let me take you to this issue of diversifying and solidifying international screen connections through the screen. Can you take us through this, please, briefly?
Well, the screen production rebate, some people actually don't like it, but this is how New Zealand becomes competitive with the rest of the world. Around the world, screen, filmmakers entice to a different location, whether it's actually Australia, whether it's actually Ireland, whether it's actually United States or Korea, everywhere, they do actually have rebates to attract people to come and film in their location. New Zealand has such amazing locations, beautiful scenery. And we also have amazing production crew that can actually support filmmakers. And, we entice some big pictures. And, we have some amazing filmmakers here, based here in New Zealand as well. So what happens is that, the screen production rebate is a certain percentage of qualifying spend. So once they've actually spent that money, they actually get a rebate to actually film in New Zealand. And that is one of the ways that we actually entice film to actually come here. They bring in, somewhere, I think the last value was around 3.4 bill, a year. And it actually, provides jobs for, 24,000 people who work in the film industry. It's not just about film crews. It's actually about, the support network, whether it's actually the catering, services or, accommodation.
Including the light boys and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone.
Tell me, do you insist on post-production as well in New Zealand?
There is actually post-production a rebate as well, and that has been very successful. But one of the things that I think needs to happen, and that's what I've actually told my ministry and the team that actually works on the screen production rebate, is that we actually need a clear data set to actually get stats and data showing the economic value of the screen production rebate. I think knowing the value and stats is actually really, really important, because sometimes we are reliant on it's stop start kind of a situation where we rely on some people who actually want to come and film.
We need some information on this, Minister. I'll tell you why. Lots of films are being shot here. You and I may not even know. Like, for instance, there was, India, to take example, the amount of money they spend on each film is phenomenal. In terms of Indian value, it's around $300 to $400 million US. That's the kind of money they spend. They come and spend, say, 3 months. They camp in Rotorua or Queenstown. They stay there, then shoot the film, but they go back to India for post-production. The reason they say is that we've got good technology now in India. They don't even go to London, and it is cheaper. That is the riding factor. Are you able to provide competitive rates for these? Then we can talk to film producers in India.
Well, I think that is the reason why the post-production rebate, as well as the screen production
rebate. But do you
rebate,
match the cost in India?
Well, the thing, look, I cannot actually say, because I don't actually run the program myself, but I create the setting as a minister. But the thing is that they should look at the rebate. If they are actually spending a particular amount of
Yeah.
sums, and they're working with the film commission, and they should be able to qualify for international screen rebate and the post-production rebate.
We may be able to connect whoever you want us to with some of the producers who come
Well,
here.
I'm very interested in actually expanding to more customers, around
They are coming
around
here
the world.
anyway.
Well,
They're coming here to shoot.
if they're shooting and they're not actually, accessing the rebate, perhaps they're not doing it right.
Yeah, correct.
You know,
You're right.
I love that they're
Perhaps
actually
they're not
spending here.
aware.
Yeah, they probably are not aware. So they should work with the New Zealand Film Commission, and if they're actually coming here, plan it in advance. I would love to see a pipeline of businesses, film businesses coming here to shoot in local. We have studios, we have locations, we have staff, we have people who are experts in film who can actually assist. And I think they'll get a much better deal than them coming and searching for themselves.
Yeah.
And,
Okay. I think
yeah.
we'll work on that and come back to you on that. What's the production rebate?
Well, that is exactly it. We, on the qualifying expenditure that they spend in New Zealand on the production, we give them international rebate is 20%.
So do you still charge GST?
I'm guessing so.
Because that's a huge factor.
Yeah, the actual details you're going to have to ask the film commission. But there's also if there are specific, there are also an additional 5% for international rebate if they actually qualify.
Okay. Finally, Minister, tell us something about the major events which your ministry does about securing and leveraging.
Oh,
What are
Major
these?
Events Fund, one of my favorites. Do you know major events? What we want to do is actually make sure that we have a pipeline of major events that are international quality coming to New Zealand. And the reason why the government is actually involved is sometimes some of these events cannot be secured without government intervention. And so it has to meet certain criterias. But when they do, it becomes something like the World Choir Games that is currently happening this week. For 11 days.
You have said that it's the biggest event ever.
It is 11,000 people involved in the choir competition. And, they're from around the world, 42 countries participating. I went to the opening, and spoke at Spark Arena, with 6,000 people at the opening. It's spectacular. And I think it's an opportunity where, it's not just about sport, it's not just about culture, and the arts. And, those are the three prongs. And often it is more sport. We have, Crankworks, which is run in Rotorua, for example, and it's the mountain biking races.
So do you fund the whole thing?
We don't fund everything. There's a portion that government actually helps.
Okay, so
But if government doesn't help fund certain aspect of it, then it doesn't happen. So what we're looking for is that in order for government to actually provide that funding, it doesn't happen. But we need it to be of international quality. And we need to actually have the people create a legacy and leveraging program. So what we mean by leveraging and legacy is that, so that the local community can actually sort of participate and actually, celebrate. Leveraging is like, those people who actually come to these major events. Are they actually looking at potentially investing in New Zealand and making sure that they work with NZTE
Right.
for investment opportunities, to engage with local businesses, all of that. It needs to have international coverage in terms of media coverage. What else is there? And make sure that, for example, some of the legacy things like, the Crankworks event made sure that there is youth and women's events that they actually created to make sure that local youth and women were involved in the races as well as
so are you
professional
working
races.
with New Zealand Tourism on this?
Well, tourism is actually part of the Major Events Ministers group. So yes, we are.
Yeah, we've covered the choir games. I think that's something which is a sense of pride for us.
It is.
For this year.
And I think it not just choir games, but even, Sail GP, Crankworks, even Taupo Supercars, they're all events that should be a sense of pride for all of us because, New Zealanders have actually welcomed these events to their local communities. They often happen off-season or shoulder season to create, visitors to the local areas and the regions and, helps support tourism in those areas where there is lack of tourism.
Finally, Minister, about the procurement system and what are the improvements you're looking at?
Value for money is one of the things that I have actually talked to MB. But when I say value for money, it doesn't necessarily mean buying the cheapest option. It has to be, for example, one of the examples I actually say is that, open source, software is not, it might be, value, cheap, but it may not necessarily be the cheapest long term if people need to actually work. 100 people still don't know how to use it, or need IT people to come and constantly change settings, whatever. So what we need is making sure that the items or the services that we actually procure is actually good value long term. And so having a government procurement system means that government ultimately pay less for we get discounts for having services that is procured for all of government.
So is this a part of the National Party policy or is it the coalition government?
The procurement systems have actually been there even before we came into government. But what we are actually wanting to do is actually make sure that we streamline it. I mean, one of the things that the coalition government has actually implemented is the very idea of potentially when government's actually procuring for government buildings, potential for wool to be utilised.
Oh, I see. Oh, Minister, we've come to the end of the video cast and podcast. We've got a lot of other questions to ask, but I suppose we'll do it another time. We have issues to discuss with you on ethnic communities, on ACC, lots of public interest in these areas. Our readers ask a lot of interesting questions. So we would certainly welcome you back to our offices sometime, and so that we can engage with you in conversing on those areas. But for now, despite not being apt to what you usually are, we thank you for spending time with us this afternoon, and we want you to get better as soon as you can.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And thank you very much for coming again. Thanks.